Thank you guys for coming today. We're going to cover how RunSignup develops internally with AI. Some of that's just a look into our own company. Some of it hopefully will give you guys some inspiration for your own work. Couple of quick housekeeping notes off the top. If you need closed captions for this, you can find those at the bottom of your GoToWebinar module. You can enable them on your end. This will be recorded and we will send it out within about 24 hours. If you ever need webinars after the fact and you cannot find that in your email, you can always find them on our website by going to webinars and events, and knowledge base and then webinars and events. If you have questions throughout this, you can go ahead and put them in the questions module, and we'll cover as many as we can today and get back to you if there's anything important that we are not able to touch on the webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to today's presenters. We have Bruce, who is back heading up our development team, and then Andrew Burke here, who has been with RunSignup for many, many years as a developer. And I'll let them get started.
Thanks for the intro, Johanna. Glad to be here with everyone and with Andrew and catching up on AI as we've got a lot going on here. So yeah, good stuff. So what we're going to go through is a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on what the developers and software engineers do here at RunSignup and how some of these AI tools are now impacting their work in a positive way and allowing us ultimately to produce what I think is going to be a lot more product enhancements and features over the years. We're going to get into maybe even some demos of how we do that, and you'll basically see kind of Andrew's view of the world, of his coding world, and some of the AI tools helping him out. So hopefully it'd be pretty interesting. Feel free to ask questions, and we'll answer them as we go. We're glad to do that. I miss anything, Andrew?
Nope, ready to go.
So I kind of wanted to start talking about how we got here. And I think this was many people's world maybe a year ago, where there's this gigantic technology shift that's happening, a huge wave coming towards us. We've been monitoring it, and it's time to either stick your head in the sand or figure out what does this all mean for our various businesses, ours included. And for us, it was a little bit, when it comes to code and product development, and Andrew, you can throw in your 2 cents here, I think we're fairly conservative in how we introduce new products, new people into our company. And it's all about maintaining the high level of quality, that I think our customers have come to expect. So, our development process, our code maintainability, security, performance, even who contributes to the code. We don't have any external contractors or third parties working in product development at all. And, that's all to keep a close rein on the system. I think it's paid off for us well, all these kind of conservative natures that we do. However, we knew this wave was coming, and we had to figure out, well, what does this really mean for our development team? And so back in April of last year, so 2024, is when we started kind of dipping our toes into coding assistance. So these AI tools that are kind of a partner with you as you're coding. And at that time, GitHub Copilot had become prevalent. And so Bob said, hey, let's go get a bunch of licenses and start fooling around with this stuff and see what it can do. So we bought license of GitHub Copilot for every developer. It was very interesting, lots of curiosity. Code IDEs, or the editor that developers use, it's had like autocomplete for a long time. So, you start typing your code and it completes the rest of it based on the syntax of the language you're using. And so this was kind of autocomplete, but much better and actually producing some code. But I don't know, I don't think we saw a real significant impact on our everyday coding. And there was lots of hiccups with it and flaws. But we were experimenting, and other parts of the company were also experimenting with all the other various tools like ChatGPT and Midjourney and some other generative tools. I'm not sure on the Copilot wave, Andrew, if you dipped your toe in with the rest of the brave souls.
It was somewhat useful, but it was also very limited. The best way that I would say is that, like, when you're on your phone and you're writing a text and there's a predictive text where it kind of guesses what you're about to say, that was really kind of where Copilot had a strength. And it could help you if you were writing a new function, and it could kind of say, I'm going to guess that these are the parameters that are going to come in and stuff like that. But it was really just kind of that, tab autocomplete or predictive text was really the limits of how much it could help.
Yeah, I think we could see the promise of it, but it really wasn't ready for us to really incorporate into our mainstream development practices.
It didn't really adjust the workflow at all, or like how you would approach a problem. You would still kind of take the same path of development that we were doing before. You just had a little bit of help to maybe write a couple of things a little bit faster.
Yep. Now in the background, our founder Bob is looking into AI as well, along with many of us. We're talking to our colleagues in other places, and there's a very particular date that I think we all recall that kind of blew our mind, to be honest with you. So Bob invited Rich Friedman, who's a friend of the company. He is someone that Bob worked with many times in the past. I've actually personally worked with him as well. He's really smart and curious development leader. And of course, we knew he's like on top of every new technology that comes down the pike. And so, we knew he was probably experimenting here. So Bob invited Rich to come explain how he was using AI in his organization on January 20th, first thing in the morning. Rich came and did a demo. And, he was at that point, this is pretty early on in January of the whole, revolution here, if you will. He was pretty aggressive in using AI to produce applications. And I think this really opened our eyes to what was possible at that time and how it was going to progress pretty quickly. Andrew, I don't know if you remember anything from that demo. Seems like forever ago now, but
yeah, nothing specific, but definitely the overall impression that you were giving. We're like, okay, we really need to start paying attention to this and incorporating it into our process.
Yeah, Rich basically talked to his AI tool, pointed it to our API, and started on the fly writing a functioning program in about 5 minutes that interacted with RunSignup. And this kicked off a whole bunch of stuff at RunSignup. First of all, it coincided with Bob taking a bold leadership step and basically stating internally to the company, hey, 2025 is the year of AI at RunSignup. We're all in on this stuff, and we're going to figure out how to make this valuable for us and our customers. And he also declared that externally, a bunch of videos and blogs were produced around our ideas on what we were going to do. Other parts of the company were looking into a product called V0, which is what Rich had showed us, which essentially, without coding at all, could produce really nice applications that interacted with our API. And that's important because we've always had an open API, but it required our customers to hire developers to write an application, which is a pretty expensive process. And with these types of tools like V0, a person with no coding experience could produce something that was pretty useful. The other thing it did for kind of kicked off in the development group is Cursor. And Cursor is a tool similar to Copilot. It's an IDE with AI built into it, but it seemed to be gaining a lot more traction at that point. And so we went ahead and bought a license for every single person in the organization that did development if they wanted to use it. Again, it's kind of goes along with our culture. Use the best tool available to you that you're comfortable with and get there at your speed. So it wasn't a you must use, it was it's here, available, go experimenting. And many people started using Cursor, not only for their own work, but for side projects. And then also figuring out how can we make Cursor more usable for the rest of the development team. And we'll probably talk about some of that as well. Andrew, if I recall back then, you were pretty busy and you didn't get on the Cursor train right away. But you did finally get into that, and I'm kind of interested in your personal journey on figuring out how this thing ultimately is going to become useful for you.
Sure. So one of the things that you mentioned is we were kind of encouraged to take Cursor and to sort of experiment with it, do like a passion project, something outside of business, just to kind of get that curiosity mindset going, to really dive into something that was fun to you. So I decided I'd do a lot of fantasy baseball, and I thought this would be a cool place for me to sort of try and incorporate that, to try and use AI as like a sports writer that could do recaps and kind of, write stuff to the league, also pull in the different data, do analysis, come up with strategy and stuff. So I thought it was a fun area to start playing with AI, especially there's a lot of public data out there. So I started working with that, and I was a little frustrated at the beginning. I was trying to get the different development environments up and running so I could actually have it build this website, and that was really tough. Configuring that and getting that up and running was pretty difficult. And then I got one page written for a team, and I was like, okay, I like this format for the team. I'd like to sort of duplicate it for all 12. And then it sort of fell down on that. Like, it was just trying to copy it in like one page 12 times, following an existing format and data I loaded into it. And it didn't really work great. So I was a little bit hesitant at that point. But then we came back around and we really plugged Cursor into our own code base and was it running within our environment. And so that initial issue that I had about just getting the development environment up and running was no longer an issue. And then I really started using it on some projects. I really started doing sort of AI first coding. And then from that point, it was off to the races. And I've been using it for about 6 months now, and it does quite a bit of work.
Yeah, so luckily everyone didn't just throw up their hands and say, I told you this stuff isn't better than we are, and we should just keep coding by hand. Yeah, the getting Cursor, I would say, integrated in our development environment in a way that it could scale across our whole organization, that was pretty important. And we wanted to do it in a secure way. So, for example, Cursor needs to have access to our code, but we didn't want our code going out to Cursor servers and becoming part of the model because that is our IP. So a lot of work went around trying to understand the security of how these tools work with our code. And then also we have a lot of standards here. That's what's kept the code maintainable and high performing and all of that. And so figuring out how do we have a tool like Cursor understand our standards just like a new hire would, so that when it's producing a result, it's stuff that we would accept. And I think we've gotten pretty far with a lot of that, which then made it become more useful for someone like you, Andrew. I thought what I might do is just share a couple stats on how we've been utilizing it, how much use we're getting. The tricky thing about this is these tools are evolving so fast that the way they are counting things keeps changing every month. So, I'd say this is directionally accurate, but not, precisely accurate, because every time they come out with a new piece of analytics, it changes how they're counting things. But basically what I was just interested in is how much use are we getting across the development team. And I used, lines added or deleted as the measurement up until this past month. And so, it's been steadily increasing. The other thing that I think is interesting, actually, I'm going to go to the live view, and this view just came out this month. So again, they've changed how they're counting things, but then I'm still figuring out what it all means. But essentially what this screen is telling us, for the past month, 34% of our total code that we committed to production, I would say had AI involved in producing it. That is a pretty high amount of code, considering we've been using this tool for less than a year. And if you look through this chart and you look at the little white dot, that's the percentage of AI for that day. And there's some days where it's pretty high, like 50%, 30%, 50%. So 50% of the code that was checked into production that day had AI involved in creating it. Now, we always have a human in the loop here. We'll probably talk a little bit about that as well. But I think it's pretty cool to see that we're getting value out of it. And you're going to see that live when we start the discussion. The other thing is we're getting benefit from it across all of our groups. So I know it's probably a little hard to read because I had to redact some things here, but these are our repos, our GitHub repositories where code is kept. So RunSignup is the main one, the one that most people are familiar with. That's the online website where you're creating your events and managing them. And you see that according to the calculations here for this month, 44% of that code had AI involved in committing it. And right down to some of our mobile app teams that are doing the check-in apps. I'm not sure what was going on in the ticket app this past month, but a very high use of AI to produce that. And, I think we're going to wind up seeing a lot of benefits from this. And I was really happy to see that it's happening across the entire development team. So that's what's going on with the stats. I think what we're going to do now is transition to seeing some real work. So let me unshare and have you start sharing, Andrew. Andrew's going to take us through, a typical project that might come across his desk and how these tools are really starting to help accelerate tackling those.
Yeah, thanks. So I have shared my editor. There's a couple of different views. This is one of the agent first views. So I'm about to start working with the cursor agent here. So I had an issue come in this week where we were importing tickets into an event and the time zone was causing some issues with what time slot that ticket was going into. So it's a bug, and I kind of do some research and start figuring it out. So I can come up to this cursor prompt and I can say, we had a report of a bug on the ticket imports into the MTE system. It looks like there was an issue with the time zones and it resulted in being placed in the wrong time slot. To start some investigation and give some suggestions. And fortunately, AI is pretty good at getting through my typos as I'm trying to get through them.
And time zone issues are notoriously difficult to debug. First, you got to figure out, you got daylight savings time that screws everything up. And then you got what time zone are we talking about, where the event is or where the person's logging in is. So there's a lot to a time zone issue bug.
Mm-hmm. So you'll see cursor is starting to go through and it's trying to examine a lot of the different stuff, coming up with a game plan. Now it's trying to look through the different time slot keys and it's really going through and finding all the stuff. It's referencing some of these files here. So we have a ticketable event manual import helper. So that's a file that's created to help do those imports in different places. And so now it's reading through this file. It's giving different line prompts where it's telling sort of the different sections it's going through, how it's searching those, and kind of giving what it's doing. And then it's also giving this high level of saying, okay, well, we need to check this import class to see how the time of day fields are calculated. And then as it's just doing all these different options here, it's planning its next moves. But I can come through here and I can click on one of these classes that it's referencing, and you'll see that it pops up in my editor on the side. And it's got the lines of code that it's referencing highlighted in that section. So it's really nice to kind of get started where I'm trying to figure out, okay, I'm not sure where this file is. I want to get an idea, start wrapping my head around where I might start looking. And so now that it has finished doing that whole process, it's giving this kind of output here, and it's giving me a summary. So we have an MTE ticket import time zone bug. Saying how the process works. So it's talking about the format in which we store our different keys, how the import it works, what the process flow of that is, and then it's going to this time slot started day, and that's what controls the time slot that the ticket is being set into. And then it's kind of giving some suggestions on possible root causes. So it might be that the time slot generation is being issued. It might have a conversion issue when it's trying to parse the time slots or missing time slots. And then it'll actually come through and it'll give suggested fixes. So it'll say, hey, this is what I think the issue might be. If this is the issue, here are some ways in which you might be able to fix it. And then it comes through and gives you all of those results. Also, it can put in different kinds of debugging issues. So if it's trying to say, we're not entirely sure where it is, it can go in and take a bunch of debugs or put a bunch of logic in to say, when this runs, let's throw a whole bunch of stuff into these logs, so that I can take the result of those logs and drop it right back into Cursor and say, hey, these are the results of those logs that you just gave us. Tell me what it is. And then it will go through and say, yeah, I got the results from those logs. I now understand what the issue is, and it'll throw out the other options and then kind of zero in on the one thing. So then it's getting, your next steps for diagnosis, sample CSV to do an import, and then checking with the time zones and then verifying it. So really, this gives me a lot of stuff to start with. I mean, that took maybe a minute or two for that to run that process. And now I have pointers to which files I might be working with, the different sections of code that might be relevant. It can tell me, what it thinks the problems might be and potential fixes for those problems. So the initial research for doing a debugging, it might take me a couple hours to track through all of this stuff, find the different files, and really come up with a first initial assessment. This gives me a great starting point. So as I like to say, I'm no longer looking at a blank piece of paper trying to figure out what's going on. It gives me just a fantastic place to get started on the debugging.
So there's a lot that just happened here. So let me back up for a minute and rewind a little bit. So you got this problem, and now you've been at the company for the life of the company. I think there's a running challenge as to what number employee you are, if you were 2, 3, or whatever, but you're in the single digits for sure. So the code fairly well, but even for you, and given it's a time zone issue, which is fairly complicated to track down, you would have to go and open half a dozen or a dozen files and trace your way through the code to get to the point where, this is possibility where the issue might be. That alone, for you, being experienced here, is probably a several hour at a minimum.
Yep, doing all the research.
Minus interruptions from people like me, and other things that come across your desk. So what it was just able to do in a couple seconds is a ton of work. And I think the other thing I wanted to point out here, for someone new that we just hired, to do this kind of analysis might take them a week, because they're not familiar with the code. They're learning it as they go. And this is actually a peer to them, almost like another person that's experienced, that they can just ask questions, because you can continue to ask this thing questions and have it respond in more detail. Now, at this point, it hasn't changed any code, correct?
Correct.
It's just giving you the mind map of the logic and possible locations and possible strategy on how you might fix the bug and test it.
Right. Yep. That's how I designed the prompt. Was I didn't really want it going into the code, so I just said, show me an initial diagnosis or do some research into the task, and it gives me these results.
Yep. Now, let's talk about how Cursor actually understands our code and knows how to navigate its way through everything. I don't know, maybe you can give a quick description of how it has indexed our code.
So it's gone through and it's taken, a look at our code, but our code base is fairly large, and it's also been built over the last about 15 years. So you may look through the code base and see something that we did 5 years ago, but it's no longer the current optimal pattern because we've come up with a better way to do it. So while Cursor has gone through and it's indexed all of our code, we do hide certain things that we don't want to be, indexed or looked at. But it'll go through and it will kind of grab that stuff, but it needs a little bit more guidance over that. So one of the things that you can do with Cursor is all memories that have been created. that it's pretty good going through and finding all those rules and are using our system and kind of being able to build off of that. And that's also where our standards over the years have really been important, because we have good standards, so it makes it very easy for these AI tools to understand what we're doing because it's fairly consistent. But it also will make mistakes. It'll pull something from an old pattern, or it will make an assumption that something's there and it's not. And it needs to be corrected for best ways you can do it. So in addition to being able to automatically sort of index and understand our code, there's this thing called memories, which is what you're seeing start to scroll across the screen here. And so over the last several months, while I've been working with Cursor, when I has an issue and it says, hey, there's it kicks out some code, and I review that code and I say, no, there's a problem here. Either it's not using the current pattern, or it forgot something, or there's some kind of bug in there. I can tell Cursor, you made a mistake. This is the way that you should do it. And I will either, point it to another section of the code where it has a better example, or I will directly tell it this is the rule, or I'll make the fix. And sometimes I'll even say, take a screenshot of where it is right now. I'll make the change, and then I'll say, okay, I fixed it. Go ahead and understand what I did. And basically every time I can do that, I can tell Cursor, hey, create a memory. And then this list of memories, about 100 right here so far, are all of the things that Cursor has done that were corrected. And now, because these are in memory, every time I tell Cursor, hey, I need to build a new function, and I want you to do the documentation, there's going to be a section in here that talks about, I think, the different database module patterns and best practices. And so then it'll have all of these things. Like I remember, here's one example. It tried to say, I'm putting this code on a new line because there's a 128 character limit for each line of code. That's not a standard in our system. That was something that I picked up from Cursor, or from this editor. And I said, hey, no, we do not have a line limit. Don't move my code to a new line when we hit that 128, because I needed to sort of override its default behavior. So now that I put this rule in place, every time I go now and write code, Cursor knows to check these rules that it has had when it's building stuff out, and it'll go through and it will actually not put that line limit over, and it'll build out past that 128 characters.
So that's just cool. This is you training it specifically on patterns that you wanted to remember. And in addition to, so you mentioned that Cursor has indexed our code. That was a pretty important piece when we were looking at this, because we didn't want our code ending up in the models and ultimately potentially ending up in someone else's code. So we looked into the security, and they're indexing it and doing some magic in probably vector databases or something to index it on their system without storing the code on their system. So that was kind of number one. And then a couple people went ahead and started feeding it our standards. And Andrew mentioned a couple standards. We have standards on syntax, different patterns. We have security standards, and all these have been written down over the years, and we usually refer to them during our code reviews. So why not just tell Cursor, hey, when you're creating a result for us, make sure you keep all these standards in mind. And then you have this level of specific memories, which are other patterns that are specific to the type of work and the area of the system that Andrew's working in. So all those things together are starting to make it allowed to make more intelligent decisions when it's creating the code for us.
It is funny, like building in the memories and working with it. You got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. Like one of the things I had to tell it was that I value accuracy over speed, because sometimes it would go through and it would make assumptions, or I'd make a new thing and it would run through and kick out a bunch of code, and it wouldn't have checked these memories because it was trying to do things quickly. And so then I had to say, like, this is a critical memory. This is very important. You need to be, like, I prefer you to take the time to check all the rules. And so now it knows that, like, whenever it kicks something out, it needs to go back and recheck the rules and don't just skip things. So we're still working on some of that, but it's why you need to review it.
Before the call, Andrew and I were talking about a prompt that he actually, I think, did use, which had to do with making sure Cursor wrote code like our CTO, who's ultimately going to be reviewing it.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. Whenever I'm like looking at something or whatever, and it's trying to pick up a new pattern, I will tell it that, hey, find the most recent database file written by Steven, our CTO, and pull all the current patterns from that file, because he's the one who's about to review my code. So if you're basing all of your pattern generation off of our CTO's codes, that's the place we want to start, versus letting it pick out a file that might be several years old if I didn't give it some more direction. So
yeah, and take your time and check your work. I'll wait the extra couple seconds.
Exactly.
Cool. So this is pretty cool. This actually hasn't generated any code, but has given you this example, gave you the strategy. I think you wanted to get us into a project where we're actually going to generate some code.
Yep. So another issue that came up this week was we had some directors accidentally delete a time slot for their event. And they were asking, hey, is it possible for us to restore that time slot? So we wanted to create an admin tool. I'll go ahead and type this out while I'm talking. Create an admin tool that allows us to restore a deleted time slot from an MTE event. Take a moment to understand how it's deleted and that process. Then build an admin tool that lives within the current admin cleanup items list.
Now in our system, we don't actually delete most data. We mark it deleted. So we probably need to explain that. It's in the database somewhere. It's just marked deleted, so not being displayed.
Yeah, because if you actually delete information, then there is no way to restore it. But if you have this soft delete, and this is one of the things that we've learned over the years, is allow people to delete stuff to get it off their screens and all that stuff so they don't see it, but keep it in the database, because you will get questions about people asking you to restore information. So here it's going to be going through. Now it's doing this investigating process. So it's trying to make sure it understands how time slots are deleted, and it's searching for all the different timed entry rules, how those different things are doing, how something is marked as deleted. I think it also referenced in here, I had pointed it to the admin cleanup items. So it knows that that's kind of that section where it's going to go. Now, after it's finished reading all of these files, coming up with all of these different things, and looking at the database tables, it's trying again, and quick little issue there. It will come up with like a to-do list, and hopefully I should kick this out in a minute here, where it will give 5-6 steps that it's going to go through of what it needs to create. And once it's kind of understands, here looks like it's coming up with this to-do list. Here we go. And so now there are 5 steps to do this code project. So it needs to add a method to the system to restore that database file. It needs to add a new method to the controller that's going to sort of handle the interaction with the user to restore it. And then it's going to add some stuff to the helper to clean stuff up. And then it needs to build the page itself and add a link to the admin page so we can actually get to it. So you see here, this is generating a whole bunch of code. So this is that first step where it's adding a new method into that. So it added 45 lines of code here. That's just restoring the single day time slot. I popped this open real quick, see if that'll come up. It's still going through. Now after it's done,
this is like a full-blown end-to-end project. You're asking it to create a user interface to do the delete, to find the record and undelete it, and interact, the middleware to interact with the database. So this is going to be an end-to-end project, which, in the old days, like a few weeks ago, would take. This is probably a week-long project, or at least a few days, right?
Yeah, definitely at least a couple of days.
Yeah, and that's, again, for you, who's...
Yeah, bro, I know where things are. I've built admin cleanup tools before.
Yeah.
Now it's going through and creating a template.
Now, you also gave it a pretty simple prompt just for demo purposes. In real life, you could give it a lot more technical detail on where to find things because you know where they're at, and it would probably help with its accuracy, I suspect.
Yeah, similar to what I was saying, you were kind of mentioning before, where I might say, hey, go to Steven's file and pull the patterns from there. I might point it in a specific spot and say, this is the function, this is the controller I want you to add a method to, or this is the page where I want you to add a link, or I want you to follow the same pattern of UI that is located on this page. So you can point it very specifically to different stuff. I kind of tried to do that by saying, hey, it's in the admin cleanup section. So I made sure it was in the right spot. So it does definitely help, but you also don't always need it. If it gets, this time it actually seemed to have done a pretty good job of getting into the right spot. So now it says it's perfect. It's created an admin tool to restore deleted time slots from an MTE event. Here's a summary of what it did. So it understood the deletion process. It created a database file, a helper class, a controller, a search template, a restore template, and then put it into the admin step. Now here's all the directions on how I would use that item. And if you come down here, we've got this full list of what has been edited. There are a total of 6 files and maybe 350 or so lines of code, right around there.
So that's a lot of code to manually create.
There's all that on the right. It's just the template file showing, and everything in green is what cursor.
Everything in green is new code.
Yep, which is this entire file.
Right. Yeah. So create a whole new file just for the template portion of the UI. So now, okay, we have a solution. You don't have to do it now, but we would obviously test that. But this isn't just getting slammed into production. So what are the other steps that you take from this point? And I guess kind of let's contrast that to the way you would have worked if you didn't have this tool.
So now I've really got a nice thing to say. Like you said, my next step here would be to follow these steps, to look at the UI, to test the item, to see does what cursor generated actually work. Most of the time it's pretty good. Sometimes it doesn't quite do what you expected, or it makes a mistake. Sometimes it's like a little bug or something it didn't understand. So I like to go through here and test these results and see if it does what I'm expecting it to do. And if not, give it the debugging information. So if I loaded that page and that page has a bug for some reason, then maybe the database method wasn't done correctly. I can take the error from that page, drop it into cursor and say, hey, this error was generated, go clean this up. And it will be able to take the results from that page and the error, and it can go in and do a pretty good job of cleaning up that error. Sometimes it makes another error, which you have to then correct, but it's usually pretty good at correcting things and getting you kind of going down that path. And then once I've gone through everything and I've confirmed that the user interface works the way that I want it to, it's actually performing the action correctly, and I'm satisfied with sort of the end result, then I go into and I really look at the different files that it's created, and I go through a line-by-line cleanup of that code. So I look at every single line of code that it has generated. So, this example for that new file that was created for this restore items. Let's see if it will pop open for me. Won't. But I would go through each one of these and look at those. And let's see if I can put it here. And go through and say, yes, okay, I like this, or there's an issue here. And this is where those rules or those memories that were being generated come from a lot. It's me going through what cursor has generated and saying, like, hey, I see that this was close, but it's not quite here, and this is the standard we want to use. And there is some time involved in that. Like, it would be faster frequently for me to just go in and make the updates. But if I were to do that, then cursor wouldn't really learn those changes. But by telling cursor that these are the changes that you need to make in order to bring this code section up to standard, it's able to generate that big list of memories, so that now it hopefully knows that going forward, and I don't have to correct that next time because it's doing that. So it's a little bit more upfront on doing that part of it, getting cursor to learn versus just jumping in and do it yourself. But over time, as that list of memory grows and you get better at writing prompts and working with stuff, then hopefully it's going to continue to generate better and better code as we continue. So hopefully that extra line-by-line review process gets a bit easier.
That's pretty interesting, because I know everyone's trying to figure out how to adjust their style of coding with this new tool. So I know some people have taken the extreme route where I only speak to it in English now, or English technical talk, and I have it do the coding. You kind of explain one of the advantage of that is it's continuing to learn. Whereas others are like, yeah, I let it get me 75% of the way, and then I want to go in and code. And it's still faster than typing the code by hand and trying to remember the syntax and how this particular language works. So it gets you pretty far, and then you do the rest. And it sounds like maybe there's different styles for different situations, or each developer is going to figure out how they want to use the tool. But there's definitely some trial and error that's occurring right now, I think, on the best way to use it. And it'll probably change as the tools improve too. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, definitely will. And it's interesting how it sort of changes the workflow a little bit. Before this type of project, it would have taken longer, but it also would have, the time spent would have been sort of different. So I would have had to write all of this 300 lines of code. So that would have taken a good chunk of time to get that done. And then I would probably have been spending less time on the actual code review because I would have written the code myself. So I would have, I would have followed those standards from the beginning. So it would take a lot more upfront work to get something going, but maybe a little bit less time on the code review side, but still longer than using Cursor overall. Now with Cursor, I'm able to sort of spin this up, and I spend less time on the initial product build out and that piece of things, and I'm spending more time on the code review side of things instead. It's overall still a decent bit of time savings from doing it that way, but it is interesting how it shifts from there. And it is very useful because I can build up a prototype and get something showing and be like, this is what we want. And it really allows you to do some demos or to see what things are going to look like so that you kind of can spend a little bit of time getting a baseline product up and you say, yeah, this is how we want it to go. And you keep going from there. Whereas if you have a demo running, you're like, oh, this isn't really what we want, or we realize there's a problem or something we didn't think about in this request, and you want to change it. Now it's taken a lot less time to get that to that point of having a workable demo and sort of seeing what it is. So it makes it much easier to pivot off of something if that initial write-up didn't go quite the way you were planning on.
I think that is a really important point because it meshes really well with our culture of iterative development. We're probably on track to do close to 3,000 deployments this year. So that's 3,000 times we've put a new product out. So many times a week. Customers don't realize it, but that's what's going on behind the scenes to deliver features. And so if we have a pretty big feature to deliver, we're not going to listen to the requirements and then go into a cave for 2 months and work on it and then just release it. We're going to release it in bits and pieces of working code so we can get that feedback. And what you're explaining is a way to even accelerate getting something in front of maybe a customer or maybe even our internal experts so they can try it out, because sometimes you just don't know how it needs to work until a user is actually trying to get something done with it. And so this kind of really short circuits that time frame, and that prevents us from building parts of products that wind up needing to be rewritten because they're just not usable enough. So that's actually a really good point. This project right here, like, let's talk about time savings, because of course that, when you buy these products, that's what you're expecting to get out of them. I think we were talking earlier that a project like this would probably take, I don't know, less than an hour to get to a working state, and that includes includes a cursory review by you, right, and work out some bugs. What if you had to do this by hand, something of this magnitude? What kind of time frame are you talking about?
It would probably be like 1 or 2 days to just get something testable up, to get some sort of a visual thing, to have all the database functions, get the basic functionality in there. So it really does get that initial demonstration, that initial write-up done significantly faster.
Yep. And so I would venture to guess, just based on my experience here at RunSignup, that if it's going to take you 2 days to do it by hand, it's probably taken one of our newer members over a week. And that's just to get it in a working state where we can start looking at it. That's not full code review, full quality test, full performance and security testing. So, so for new people, this has even more of an accelerated effect, I believe. But even for you, you're going from like 3 days to an hour to get to something usable. That's a significant increase. And yeah, I think it's really great. What about, so, a lot of us, myself included, got into coding because it was fun. It's like a puzzle, and you get a lot of satisfaction to solve the puzzle and then see users using it. And so the coding part is the puzzle solving, right? Is this as much fun? Is it more fun from a personal point of view of you doing your work every day?
For me personally, I find it a lot more fun to work with this. I've always enjoyed the design aspects, working with the users to come up with the requirements, to really understand the problem, and then come up with the approach and the solution and implementing that part of it. So really doing the design and the architect of the project has always been the part that I really enjoy. And then you're going in and writing the code, and Cursor is able to take a lot of that heavy lifting off. And there's issues that you run into where, you could spend an hour or 2 hours banging your head against a wall trying to debug an error, trying to figure out where something is or what the problem is. Like I was saying before, I can now take an error that Cursor gives me and drop it back into the chat and say, hey, fix this bug that we just found. Mm-hmm. And it does a pretty good job of that. So there's a lot less for me of trying to figure out what that bug is, get in there and try and do that part of things, or like I said, a really heavy technical piece of things where it's like I'm trying to work with this new technology for display that I don't know all that well, and I have to spend all this time trying to figure out how this works, or spending a day on trying to get this pop-up to work correctly or something like that inside of this stuff. And I spend a lot less time on those debugging issues or really those like really technical pieces. And so for me, it's a lot more fun because I'm spending more time on those big project ideas that I enjoy.
Yeah, and I suspect it's also an accelerator for learning. Like if you mentioned, if you had to implement a new technology, like let's say you've never done a UI in Vue.js, right? Mm-hmm. To learn that from scratch, you got to really invest some time. But I imagine if you did a project in Vue that you never did before with the assistance of an AI agent, you're going to learn it faster as well as produce, the product faster.
Definitely, because instead of sitting there trying to figure out how to get this thing working because I don't understand it, it's going to give me a working product. And then when I do my review and I go line by line and see what it has generated, I'm going to have a working product for the exact use case that I wanted. And I'm just going to see, oh, this is how you do it. And so you remove that whole thing of I'm banging my head against the wall trying to figure out how to write this new technology and get, what functions are available, how do I do this thing and all of that. Instead, it's kind of built that whole piece for me. And then I check it for, making sure the right syntax, patterns, formatting, security, all those other things. But I'm reviewing something that's working that I gave it the specific directions on how to build, which is definitely an accelerator on learning something new.
Mm-hmm. And, I think it's kind of magic how this stuff works. I mean, it's kind of amazing how fast it can understand complicated technology and create something new. But at the end of the day, it's not magic. It's computer science. And I think what you're pointing out, what we're kind of been talking about here is you still need to be a good engineer to be able to effectively use a tool like this. Now, we're not talking about V0, where you're just calling an API and there's not millions of people using the app at one time like it is with RunSignup. You really have to be cognizant of professional engineering techniques in order to make it secure, make it scalable. And so I think that's where the engineering comes in. And I think what you're saying is you're able to spend more time on the engineering part and solving the logical problem versus making sure you got the right number of semicolons and it's indented correctly and you're using the right syntax and all the kind of drudgery of coding of the past.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah, cool. So what's your kind of future outlook on where this is going, how it's going to impact you personally, your work here at RunSignup, given the speed that you've seen it improve up till now? What's kind of going through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's very exciting to see. And like I said, building out that list of memories that I showed earlier, that as AI gets better, and I think somebody else said that the AI you're using right now is the worst AI you're going to use because it's just always going to keep getting better. And so, like I said, there is a lot of time savings on the initial side of here. You do kind of pay for that a little bit on the code review side of things because you have to check where it's coming out. But I'm hoping over time, as that list of memories improves and the AI gets better, that code that it output continues to improve. And if that happens, then you kind of we're spending less time on that piece of it, and it can continue to sort of accelerate overall development speed. And so that's really exciting to see how much that's going to have of an impact, and really allowing us to spend time focused on like that customer request and making sure we understand it. And I'm going to be able to spend more time on, is my UI the exact way that I want it? Is this the best way for the user to interact with this thing, or is there something else we can do to improve it? Because you're not trying to say, okay, well, I'm getting this feature out, and we have a certain standard, obviously, but you can spend a little bit more time on that design stage and still be able to meet the requests on time.
Yeah. I'm personally very excited about this. I know there's a lot of discussion about, jobs and how, oh, well, this is going to eliminate jobs. And have been some gigantic layoffs just recently in larger companies. But I think for a company like ours, where we have a handpicked team and we're solely concentrated on solving this one problem for our customers of event management and in endurance and ticketing and fundraising. We have so many ideas, both internally and from our customers. There's like endless amount of work to be done. And if we can do it more efficiently, which I believe we are starting to do that now, we can really deliver a lot more to the market in a short amount of time, while maintaining, what our customers have come to expect, which is a high quality platform. The other thing I think this really is interesting for me is, we're not hiring hundreds of people a year. I wouldn't want to do that, but we are hiring a few a year. And, I think I mentioned before, the ramp up for a developer here at RunSignup, is typically 2 years, maybe 3 even, to really understand all the different areas of the code. And I think this technology is shortening that considerably. And so, for our kind of university hires coming in, it's a great opportunity to learn quicker and use these tools to really become an expert and ultimately bring value to the company, which, for the people that we hire, everybody wants to bring as much value to our customers as possible. Like, there's no one sitting with their feet up, trying to get out of work. Like, it's fun to come in and create this stuff. And, having a tool that's going to allow us to do it quicker and with high quality, I think is just, it's a very exciting time to be in software development right now, in my opinion. So, yeah, very good. I hope everyone enjoyed seeing how a real developer works in his natural habitat with his new tool and his new toys. I want to thank Andrew for going through the demo. We debated whether we wanted to do a live demo, because you never know. AI does not give you the same answer every time. So,
it does not.
But we decided to wing it to give you an idea of how we're using these tools. And I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And yeah, thank you very much for your support with all your various events out there.
Thank you.
Bye now.